A cold, bitter wind swept through the snow-laden pines as Captain Viktor Sokolov led his platoon cautiously into the depths of the forest. Every branch, heavy with frost, creaked under its own weight, threatening to snap at any moment, sending snow cascading onto the frozen ground. The soldiers' boots sank into the ice-crusted snow, each step leaving an imprint that would soon be erased by the swirling blizzard that had begun to fall. The Eastern Front had stripped away all illusions of glory. Here, only survival, instinct, and discipline ruled. The pale sunlight fought to pierce the thick morning fog, casting ghostly rays across the white landscape. Sokolov's eyes scanned the shadows, noting the subtle changes in the trees, the slight depressions in the snow, and the eerie silence that hung over the forest. Somewhere ahead, German scouts may have been hiding, their eyes trained to spot every movement. Every man in the platoon knew the slightest sound could betray them. Their breath rose in frozen clouds, mixing with the snowflakes as they moved forward. The captain signaled his men to spread out, rifles raised, forming a loose line that could cover the path ahead. Behind him, Sergeant Mirov whispered instructions, guiding the soldiers through the thick undergrowth and snow-packed trails. The forest seemed alive, listening to their footsteps, judging their courage, waiting for the inevitable clash. Snow-covered branches dripped icicles that could fall without warning, and the men learned to step softly, almost reverentially, in a world that had become both battlefield and graveyard. As they advanced, each soldier recalled the stories of comrades who had vanished in these woods during previous patrols, reminders that the forest could be both friend and enemy. They passed broken stumps and fallen logs, each telling a story of past destruction, each a silent witness to the horrors of war. Captain Sokolov's mind, however, was on the mission, the German convoy hidden somewhere beyond the ridge. This was not just reconnaissance, it was intelligence that could alter the course of the upcoming engagements in the valley below. Hours passed as the platoon moved with painstaking care. Snow continued to fall, dulling the sounds around them, but not the tension that thrummed in every man's chest. The frozen forest seemed endless, a labyrinth of white and shadow that tested their endurance, their vigilance, and their nerve. Sokolov paused, kneeling briefly to inspect a set of tracks partially hidden by fresh snow. "German scouts," he whispered, noting the careful spacing, the faint drag of something heavy. He signaled Mirov, and the men adjusted their formation, flanking around the tracks to avoid a direct confrontation. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it faint echoes of distant artillery fire, reminding them that the world outside this forest was burning, that lives and territories were being claimed and lost in unrecorded skirmishes. Yet here, in the midst of the snow and ice, their senses were heightened to the point of exhaustion. Every rustle, every shadow, every distant crack was magnified into potential catastrophe. Sokolov's eyes caught a sudden flicker in the corner of his vision, a shadow moving between the trees, deliberate and fast. He raised his binoculars, heart pounding, but the movement vanished before he could identify it. "Stay sharp," he whispered, and the platoon froze, rifles poised. Each man understood the unspoken truth. In these woods, every second could mean life or death. They pushed on, step by step, guided by the captain's experience, the sergeant's instinct, and their own hardened survival instincts. The forest, silent yet threatening, had become a crucible for courage. and as the snow thickened around them, the soldiers pressed onward, determined to uncover the German presence before it could strike first. The platoon advanced cautiously, their boots crunching softly over the thick layer of snow that blanketed the forest floor. Captain Viktor Sokolov's eyes scanned every shadow, every bend in the path, aware that danger could appear from any direction. The forest, silent for miles, seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Then, ahead, something unusual caught the captain's attention. A German scout uniform, abandoned and draped over a broken branch. The uniform fluttered slightly in the wind, its presence unsettling, almost accusing. Sokolov crouched low, signaling his men to stop. His breath condensed in the frigid air as he carefully studied the scene. Snow around the branch had been disturbed, footprints leading toward the ridge, partially covered by fresh snowfall, but enough was visible to show signs of a struggle. Every soldier in the platoon instinctively felt the tension spike. This was no ordinary patrol site. The abandoned uniform suggested that someone had been here and had met something terrible, or worse, that the danger still lingered nearby. Sergeant Mirov moved closer, scanning the surrounding trees. "Too quiet," he murmured. "It feels like they're watching us." Sokolov nodded, his eyes narrowing. "It's a trap if we're not careful. Stay alert. Every step counts." The men spread slightly, rifles raised, scanning the dense forest for signs of movement. The trees, tall and skeletal, created a labyrinth of shadow and white, where one wrong movement could give away their position. The wind carried faint sounds of cracking branches, almost imperceptible, but enough to keep the platoon on edge. Every soldier was painfully aware that an ambush could erupt at any moment, that their position could turn from hunter to hunted in a heartbeat. Sokolov studied the tracks leading from the branch. They were uneven, hurried, and then abruptly stopped. Something had happened here, something violent. The forest seemed to whisper around them, the sound of the wind blending with the distant groan of metal and faint echoes of artillery fire from beyond the valley. He gestured for the men to advance slowly, checking each footstep, scanning every shadow. The uniform had drawn them forward, and now caution was their only safeguard. As they moved, Private Leonid Karpov's breath came in sharp puffs. His fingers tightened around his rifle, knuckles white beneath the gloves. "Captain, what do you think happened here?" he whispered, voice barely audible. Sokolov didn't answer immediately, choosing instead to observe the area. Every detail, the slight drag of a boot in the snow, the faint tear in the fabric, the position of nearby branches, spoke silently of a sudden encounter, of fear, of a man forced to abandon everything in desperation. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but firm. "Something or someone struck this man down. That's all we know for now. We must move carefully and assume the enemy is nearby." The men continued their advance, each step deliberate, each breath measured. The snow muffled the sound, but the tension was palpable, as if the forest itself was compressing around them. Every snap of a twig, every distant caw of a crow became magnified, a potential signal of danger. The abandoned uniform acted as both a warning and a challenge. They had to proceed, but every movement carried the risk of death. Hours passed slowly, the forest turning into a maze of white and shadow. The soldiers pushed forward, their senses heightened to the extreme. Each soldier remembered the stories of men lost in these woods, men who had vanished without a trace. They moved like ghosts, careful not to make a sound,
aware that one misstep could lead them into the same fate. By late afternoon, the platoon reached a small clearing near the ridge. Here, Sokolov finally allowed himself a moment to survey the surrounding forest. The abandoned uniform hung quietly in the distance, a reminder of the dangers that had already struck and those that still waited. The men adjusted their positions, taking cover behind snowdrifts and fallen logs, their eyes scanning for movement. Sokolov whispered to Mirov, "We move at first light. We report what we've seen, and we watch. They're out there, somewhere." The platoon settled for the night, the abandoned scout uniform still swaying in the cold wind like a silent sentinel. Every man knew sleep would be brief and uneasy. The forest held its secrets tightly, and tomorrow would test their courage in ways they could not yet imagine. The wind howled through the trees as darkness fell, carrying the faintest whispers of distant battle, and the men waited, tense, vigilant, ready for the confrontation they knew was inevitable.
The forest clearing opened before them, a pale expanse of snow interrupted only by broken trees and frozen undergrowth. Captain Sokolov signaled for his men to halt, his eyes locking on a motionless figure lying sprawled in the snow. As they approached cautiously, the sight became horrifyingly clear. A German scout, face frozen in sheer terror, his body twisted unnaturally against the icy ground. Every line of his face told a story of sudden, overwhelming fear, a man who had glimpsed something so dreadful that death had come almost as a relief. The men stepped carefully around the body, their breath rising in thick clouds, mingling with the cold mist of the forest. Sergeant Mirov examined the tracks and disturbed snow around the corpse. The patterns told a tale, a struggle, a flight, and then the abrupt halt of life itself. There were no additional footprints leading away, only this solitary figure frozen in a moment of absolute panic. Private Karpov shivered, even through this thick winter coat. What happened to him?" he whispered, voice tight with fear. Sokolov shook his head slowly, studying the forest. Whatever it was, it came suddenly and violently. The squad moved in a careful semicircle, scanning every tree, every shadow, aware that the killer may still linger nearby. The forest, once seemingly benign and silent, now felt ominous and alive with unseen threat. The trees swayed gently, carrying the cold wind that seemed to whisper warnings. Snowflakes fell silently around them, yet the tension was deafening. Sokolov crouched beside the German soldier, noting the torn uniform, the hastily dropped equipment, and the unnatural angle of his limbs. The man's eyes, wide and frozen, stared blankly toward the tree line from which he had presumably fled, or from which he had been hunted. The forest held its secrets tightly, and this scene was a grim clue. The soldiers felt the weight of mortality pressing against them, knowing that their own lives could end just as abruptly. Mirov pointed toward the surrounding trees. There, signs of movement, small, cautious. They might be watching. The captain nodded. We move slowly. We cannot afford mistakes. The men adjusted their formation, moving in a tight, cautious line, each rifle poised, each step deliberate. Every sound, a snapping twig, a falling icicle, even the whisper of the wind was analyzed, interpreted, judged. Each soldier's heart raced in anticipation. The abandoned scout was a grim warning, a reminder of the lethal danger that lurked invisibly. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they continued forward, their eyes scanning for the faintest signs of life. The forest seemed to close in on them, every branch casting dark shadows, every hollow filled with possibilities. Captain Sokolov motioned for a brief halt,
using binoculars to scan the distance for any additional movement. The tracks, partially covered by fresh snow, hinted at a direction but revealed nothing about what had caused the terror in the scouts' final moments. The soldiers were aware of the silence, a silence so complete it was almost unnatural. It pressed against their eardrums, urging caution, demanding vigilance. They proceeded slowly, carefully, avoiding any disturbance that might betray their presence to whatever had claimed the German scout. As they circled the clearing to continue toward the ridge, Sokolov's mind worked swiftly. The German scout was more than a casualty. He was a warning, a fragment of intelligence. The manner of his death suggested skill, ruthlessness, and sudden precision. Whoever or whatever had done this could be nearby, observing, waiting for an opportune moment. Night began to fall, though the pale winter light lingered, casting long, distorted shadows. The soldiers knew they could not stop. To linger in this clearing was to risk death. They pressed on, carefully, eyes alert, senses sharpened by fear and experience alike. The terror frozen in the scouts' face lingered in their minds, fueling determination and caution in equal measure. Captain Sokolov's whisper broke the tension. Stay together. Watch the trees. Move toward the ridge. And whatever happens, survive. The platoon obeyed, advancing through the snow with a heightened awareness, knowing that each step might lead them closer to the enemy or to death itself. The forest had revealed a fragment of its horror through the terrified German soldier, and now it demanded respect, vigilance, and courage. The ridge and the mission beyond awaited them. But the memory of fear, frozen in the snow, would remain with them forever.
After hours of painstaking advance through the dense, frozen forest, Captain Viktor Sokolov and his platoon finally emerged onto the ridge. The view that unfolded before them was both breathtaking and ominous. A vast frozen valley stretched out, its icy river glinting faintly beneath the pale winter sunlight, while patches of snow-dusted forest formed a labyrinth of white and shadow. The cold wind whipped across the ridge, biting at exposed skin and carrying the faint echoes of distant artillery fire from German positions far beyond. Sokolov raised his binoculars and surveyed the valley below. There, partially concealed by the morning mist, was the German convoy they had been tracking, their trucks and half-tracks moving cautiously along the ice-slicked road, soldiers walking beside their vehicles, scanning the tree line for any sign of ambush. The careful spacing of the convoy suggested discipline and readiness, yet the captain could detect subtle signs of tension. The driver's rigid postures, the way the soldiers' rifles rested lightly in their hands, alert but wary. "Position yourselves," Sokolov ordered quietly, his voice calm yet firm. "Take cover behind snowdrifts and rocks. Keep your rifles ready. Observe, but do not engage until my signal." The men obeyed, flattening themselves against the uneven ridge, their breaths visible in the cold air, each exhale a fragile white plume dissolving into the morning fog. Every soldier understood the gravity of the moment. The ridge was their vantage point, their advantage, but also their exposure. One wrong move could invite enemy fire from the valley below. Sokolov scanned the convoy methodically, counting trucks, half-tracks, and men, noting the patterns of movement, weak points, and potential obstacles. Every detail mattered. He signaled Mirov to mark the positions on their map, calculating angles for possible engagement. The Soviet platoon had the element of surprise, but they were outnumbered and could be overwhelmed in seconds if the Germans discovered them prematurely.
The wind whistled across the ridge, carrying the faint scent of smoke and burnt wood from distant skirmishes. The men huddled slightly closer to each other, seeking warmth from shared body heat, but also reinforcing their sense of unity. Each face reflected concentration, tension, and quiet determination. There was no room for hesitation. In moments like this, doubt could be fatal. Sokolov's mind was already planning the ambush. The Own Ridge offered several strategic advantages: elevation, natural cover, and clear lines of fire across the valley road. Yet the Germans had not been idle. Small obstacles and natural formations could conceal snipers, and the snow itself could betray movement if the soldiers were not careful. Every step had to be measured, every rifle aimed precisely, every decision weighed against both risk and reward. He glanced at his platoon, noting their readiness. Private Karpov adjusted his grip on his machine gun. Sergeant Mirov checked his map one last time, and the others kept silent, their eyes scanning the distant convoy. Each man felt the weight of responsibility. A single misstep could mean not only their own deaths, but also failure to stop the convoy carrying vital supplies to the front. Minutes passed slowly, stretched by tension and icy wind. Every distant sound, the clatter of a loose wheel, the faint crunch of snow under boots, even the subtle creaking of ice on the river, heightened their awareness. Sokolov reminded himself that patience was as important as courage. A premature attack could be disastrous. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he lowered the binoculars and nodded. "Hold your positions. Wait for my signal. Remember, precision and timing will decide this battle. Do not waste ammunition. Observe everything." The men settled into silent vigilance, each heartbeat echoing in the cold, still air. Below, the convoy moved slowly, unaware of the deadly eyes watching from above. The ridge was no longer just a vantage point, it was the prelude to a decisive moment, a stage where courage, strategy, and survival would collide. And as the wind swept across the snowy ridge, Captain Sokolov felt the familiar weight of command. The lives of his men, the mission, and the fragile line between victory and disaster rested on his next decisions.
The morning stillness of the snowy valley shattered in an instant. Captain Viktor Sokolov's carefully laid ambush ignited with sudden, explosive violence. From behind snowdrifts and fallen pines, Soviet rifles cracked sharply, punctuating the cold air as bullets tore through the silence. Explosions erupted along the icy road as grenades detonated against the lead trucks of the German convoy, sending plumes of black smoke and fire curling into the pale winter sky. Chaos descended on the valley. Soldiers scrambled from vehicles, rifles raised, shouts piercing the storm of noise and smoke. The convoy, trained and disciplined, attempted to regroup, but the precision and timing of the ambush left them vulnerable. Snow sprayed in every direction with each blast, turning the pristine white landscape into a battlefield of fire, ice, and blood. Sokolov's platoon moved like shadows, emerging and disappearing behind cover, firing, repositioning, and maintaining the deadly rhythm of the attack. Captain Sokolov ducked behind a fallen tree, his rifle spitting fire into the German half-tracks. Each shot was deliberate, each action calculated to maximize impact while minimizing exposure. He shouted commands, coordinating flanks, directing fire, and ensuring that every soldier knew their position in this deadly symphony. Sergeant Mirov tossed a grenade, its arc precise, as it struck one of the trucks, engulfing it in flames. Sparks and debris scattered into the snow, momentarily illuminating the fierce determination etched onto each soldier's face.
The German soldiers attempted a counterattack, rushing from the burning vehicles, but Sokolov's men were well positioned, covering every approach with rifles, machine guns, and grenades. The clash of cold steel, the roar of gunfire, and the sharp scent of smoke combined to create a sensory storm, overwhelming in its intensity, yet strangely ordered in the disciplined chaos of Sokolov's command. Snow continued to fall, softening some of the noise, yet doing nothing to obscure the devastation. The convoy's vehicles were reduced to burning hulks, their engines sputtering and dying amidst the snow and debris. German soldiers fell under precise fire, while those who survived scrambled for cover, unsure of the source or the number of attackers. Every soldier in Sokolov's platoon understood the stakes. Victory here was more than a tactical success. It was a blow to the enemy's supply lines, a disruption that could affect battles miles away. Yet every moment also carried mortal risk. One misstep, one stray bullet, one overlooked position could turn the ambush into a slaughter. The ridge, the snow, and the forest all played roles in the deadly geometry of combat. Amidst the roar and smoke, Sokolov's eyes remained sharp, scanning the battlefield, calculating trajectories, anticipating counterattacks. He could see the determination in the German soldiers' movements, their attempts to reorganize, and the flicker of fear as the ambush continued with deadly precision. Hours seemed to pass in minutes, each second stretching as the violence raged. Snow sprayed from explosions, adding a surreal quality to the chaos, as if the world itself were being painted in white, red, and black. Yet the Soviet soldiers pressed forward, relentless and disciplined, every movement deliberate, every action guided by the captain's command and their own unwavering resolve. Finally, after a sustained and ferocious assault, the German convoy was in ruins. The road was littered with burned-out trucks, scattered equipment, and the bodies of those who had been caught unprepared. The valley, once quiet and foreboding, now echoed only with the crackle of fires and the distant hum of retreating engines. Sokolov lowered his rifle, chest heaving from exertion and cold. He surveyed the aftermath with a grim satisfaction. The ambush had succeeded, yet the cost in adrenaline, tension, and risk reminded every man that in war, triumph is always shadowed by danger. The ridge, the forest, and the frozen valley had borne witness to courage, precision, and survival against overwhelming odds. As the smoke drifted into the cold sky, Sokolov signaled his men to regroup, tend to the wounded, and prepare for any counterattack. The mission had been accomplished, but in the theater of war, peace was only momentary, and vigilance was eternal. The village lay in ruins, shrouded in a gray, oppressive winter sky. Smoke rose from the splintered remnants of houses, curling into the air like wounded spirits. Wooden beams, shattered carts, and frozen debris littered the snow-covered streets. Captain Viktor Sokolov led his platoon carefully through the devastation, boots crunching softly over debris and ice. Every step felt precarious, every sound amplified in the unnatural quiet that had settled over the town. The air reeked of smoke, burnt wood, and the faint tang of blood. The wind carried whispers of distant artillery, echoing through the empty alleys and shattered doorways. Sokolov motioned his men to take cover behind the remains of a collapsed wall, his eyes scanning for any signs of remaining enemy troops or hidden snipers. Despite the chaos, his men moved with precision, their training and discipline keeping panic at bay. Frozen bodies lay where they had fallen, reminders of the sudden and merciless air raid that had struck just hours before. Some were soldiers, some civilians caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The men passed carefully, respecting the dead, understanding that this village had become a battlefield overnight. Sergeant Mirov crouched beside a partially collapsed building, pointing out scorched marks and debris patterns. "They hit this side hard," he whispered. "Probably a direct strike on the supply depot." Sokolov nodded, taking in the devastation. The village, once alive with the hum of daily life, was now a skeleton of its former self. Roofs were gone, chimneys toppled, and windows shattered, leaving only dark, gaping holes. The cold bit through uniforms and gloves, adding to the physical and psychological weight of the scene. Yet there was work to be done. They needed to secure the area, check for survivors, and prepare for any enemy counterattacks. As they moved through the snow-covered streets, Sokolov's platoon discovered scattered supplies, ammunition boxes torn open, and personal belongings frozen under the snow. Each item told a story of abrupt departure, panic, or desperate survival. The wind swept through the ruins, carrying the faint scent of gunpowder and burnt wood, reminding them that war spared nothing. A small group of surviving villagers emerged cautiously from the remains of their homes, faces pale and eyes wide with fear. Sokolov approached them, signaling his men to stand down. The villagers' voices trembled as they recounted the sudden bombing, the destruction, and the lives lost. Sokolov listened carefully, taking note of any useful information, while ensuring the men remained vigilant. In the center of the village, a ruined building had collapsed on its occupants. The captain ordered a careful inspection. Snow and debris were cleared, revealing a soldier trapped beneath splintered beams. He was alive, though badly injured, and Sokolov immediately directed men to provide aid, stabilizing him and preparing for evacuation. Each action was performed with precision, the chaos of the destruction tempered by discipline and determination. The wind howled through the ruins as shadows lengthened across the frozen village. Sokolov gathered his men for a brief huddle behind what remained of the town hall. "This village has been hit hard," he said, voice steady despite the weight of loss. "We secure it, we gather intelligence, and we prepare for any enemy counterattacks. This air raid is not the end, it is a warning, and we must respond with vigilance and courage." The platoon spread out again, moving through alleys, around collapsed walls, and along snow-covered streets, scanning for threats. Smoke from fires mingled with the mist of their breath, creating an eerie haze. Every shadow, every flicker of movement became a potential danger, demanding focus and calm under pressure. By late afternoon, the village was secured. Fires were smoldering, injured were attended to, and the men had gathered useful intelligence from scattered documents and abandoned equipment. Sokolov took a moment to look across the ruined landscape. The destruction was immense, but the resilience of his men and the discipline with which they handled the aftermath offered a glimmer of hope. As the cold evening approached, the captain signaled the platoon to regroup and prepare to move to the next objective. The village, though scarred and battered, had been held, and its secrets catalogued. The survivors, though shaken, would remember the soldiers who had protected them, and the men themselves would carry the lessons of the devastation forward. In war, there was no pause for grief, only the relentless march of duty, courage, and survival.
The dense winter forest closed around Captain Viktor Sokolov and his platoon like a living, breathing entity. The trees, heavy with frost and snow, formed a maze of white and shadow, every branch a potential hiding place for the enemy. Sokolov signaled his men to move silently, rifles at the ready, eyes scanning the undergrowth for any sign of movement. The tension was palpable. Every snapping twig or shifting snowdrift could announce an ambush. Suddenly, a series of sharp gunshots shattered the eerie silence. German soldiers had sprung their trap. Snow erupted into the air as bullets tore through branches and ricocheted off trunks. The platoon dove for cover behind rocks, fallen logs, and the natural snowdrifts that dotted the forest floor. The first moments were chaos incarnate. The crack of rifles, the roar of machine guns, and the brief, sharp explosions of grenades echoed through the frost-laden woods. Sokolov's voice cut through the cacophony, calm but commanding. "Hold your positions! Flank left! Return fire!" His men moved with practiced precision, emerging briefly from cover to fire, then ducking back behind protection. Sergeant Mirov directed a squad to a higher position on a small ridge, giving them a vantage point to suppress the advancing enemy. The forest itself seemed to pulse with the violence, snow and ice scattering with every shot. Private Karpov's fingers were numb, yet he gripped his rifle with determination. He fired steadily, aiming for the shadows that betrayed the enemy's presence. Every soldier understood the deadly rhythm of the engagement: observe, fire, reposition, and survive. The Germans were skilled, using the forest's natural cover to their advantage, but Sokolov's men were disciplined, experienced, and fueled by the survival instinct honed in countless previous skirmishes. Sokolov's eyes scanned the battlefield, noting movements, counting enemies, predicting their actions. He lobbed a grenade into a concealed pocket of enemy soldiers, and the resulting explosions sent snow and splintered wood into the air, forcing the Germans to retreat temporarily. Smoke and frost mingled, creating a surreal, almost cinematic scene of combat. White snow flecked with black and red, shadows dancing across the twisted landscape. Despite the chaos, the Soviet soldiers maintained cohesion. Sokolov moved from one position to another, giving orders, checking cover, and ensuring that each man's fire was coordinated. The German ambush, though deadly, had underestimated their discipline and training. The forest became a chessboard, each movement calculated, each shot deliberate, as the battle continued in bursts of controlled violence. Hours seemed to stretch, the wind howling through the trees, carrying the sounds of battle deeper into the frozen wilderness. The men's faces were streaked with sweat and frost, eyes narrowed in focus, muscles tense from constant readiness. Yet amidst the fear and the gunfire, there was clarity, a precise understanding of their mission and the tactics required to survive. Finally, after a relentless engagement, the ambush began to collapse. The Germans, caught between disciplined Soviet fire and the treacherous forest terrain, started to retreat, leaving behind casualties and abandoned equipment. Snow-covered logs and rocks now bore the marks of battle: scorched wood, shattered branches, and trampled snow, revealing the violent struggle that had occurred. Sokolov exhaled sharply, signaling his men to regroup and check the surrounding area for survivors or remaining threats. The forest was once again quiet, but the echoes of the ambush lingered, the memory of gunfire, the flash of muzzle fire, and the faces of men fighting for their lives imprinted on every mind. As the snow settled and the wind swept through the frost-covered trees, the platoon took stock of their position. They had survived the ambush, inflicted significant losses on the enemy, and maintained discipline under the most extreme stress. Captain Sokolov allowed himself a moment to appreciate their courage and coordination, knowing that in these forests, survival depended on vigilance, precision, and unwavering resolve. The forest, once a silent labyrinth, had become a battlefield, a crucible for courage, and a testament to the resilience of men forged by the harsh realities of war. The soldiers moved forward cautiously, aware that in the Eastern Front, danger was never fully gone, only temporarily held at bay.
The ridge stood cold and silent under a pale winter sky, a thin line of snow-covered earth that separated survival from annihilation. Captain Viktor Sokolov and his platoon had taken positions behind rocks, fallen logs, and crumbling walls, their breath visible in the frigid air. Below, the German infantry was advancing steadily, the crunch of boots on snow echoing through the valley like the drumbeat of impending doom. The men knew that this confrontation would be decisive, a test of courage, skill, and sheer willpower. Sokolov raised his binoculars, scanning the advancing waves of enemy soldiers.
Each step they took across the snow seemed deliberate, calculated, yet unaware of the storm waiting above. He signaled to his men, ensuring rifles were loaded, machine guns positioned, and grenades ready. Every soldier understood their role in this final stand. Retreat was not an option, and hesitation could mean death. The first shots rang out from the ridge, a precise volley of rifle fire cutting down the nearest German soldiers. Snow erupted into the air with each impact, mixing with the smoke and sparks of detonating explosives. The German forces faltered, but regrouped quickly, their discipline tested but unbroken. The battle escalated with brutal intensity. Machine guns rattled, grenades exploded, and every man fought with the knowledge that the ridge was their lifeline. Sokolov's voice rang out above the chaos, calm yet commanding. "Hold your positions, fire with precision, cover each other." His eyes swept across the platoon, noting the courage in every face, the grim determination in their stance. Even as bullets tore through the snow around them, the soldiers remained steady, firing in coordinated bursts, repositioning with practiced efficiency, and refusing to yield an inch of ground. The snow-covered ridge became a theater of war, every detail amplified by the cold, pale light. Explosions sent plumes of snow and earth into the air, painting the battlefield in streaks of white, gray, and crimson. The men could see the enemy's approach clearly against the stark snow, giving them the advantage, but the sheer number of attackers pressed relentlessly against their defenses. Captain Sokolov moved along the line, checking positions, shouting orders, and firing his own rifle when necessary. Beside him, Sergeant Mirov coordinated suppressive fire, ensuring no gaps could be exploited. Private Karpov fired rapidly, his aim steady despite fatigue and frostbite creeping into his fingers. Every soldier understood that this ridge, though narrow and exposed, was the pivot upon which survival depended.